Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this latest session of the International Higher Education Commission. My name is Chris Skidmore, I'm former Universities Minister, and I chair what we know as the IHEC. The IHEC was kindly supported by Oxford International Education Group as a means by which we could come together as the sector to look at what potentially a new international higher education strategy might look like for the future. I commissioned and took forward the first international higher education strategy back in 2019. And we were keen to look at what potentially an update might look like, given that it's likely the UK has met the 600,000 figure target that was set for 2030. How could this be maintained? How can we ensure that the UK remains a global leader when it came to attracting international talent, recognizing also that there are a number of countries also seeking to retain and attract international students as a really important part of their higher education ecosystem. Since then, however, obviously, there have been a number of challenges to looking at international education, not least around potential visa reform that might limit the number of international students in the future. We're keen, as part of this commission, to tackle head-on some of those political challenges, but also, I think, some of the misinformation and disinformation that potentially comes out of looking at the contribution that international students make to the UK. Everyone, I think, on this call recognizes the value that international students can bring, not just economically, but socially and culturally to the UK, and the huge opportunity there is for future collaborations as we help to train up a new generation of students to become leaders and young adults from across the world. I'm delighted, however, that the Commission has begun to get some significant traction with a number of individuals keen to have joined as commissioners. We announced our first tranche of commissioners that's on the website. We'll put the details of the website in the chat box shortly. And I'm delighted that we can now sort of announce another sort of round of commissioners today. So we have Professor Shishir Kapoor, the President and Principal at King's College London, Professor Andrew Nolan, the convener of the International Committee on Universities Scotland and Principal and Vice Chancellor of Edinburgh Napier, Lucy Stonehill, the CEO of Bridge U, Sannam Arora, the founder and chair of the National Indian Students and Alumni Association. In addition, Wendy Alexander, VP International for the University of Dundee and the Profession of International Education and Higher Education Trade and Investment Envoy, as well as being a British Council trustee. Katie Normington, Midlands Enterprise University's board member and VC at De Montfort. Then we have two student commissioners from UKISA, Sarah Kozakova, Sarah is joining us today, and we'll look forward to hearing from her shortly. And Sarah is the student commissioner co-chair of UKISA's student advisory group and currently studying for a master's degree at Newcastle University. And Zikwi Jia, a student commissioner who's recently a Glasgow graduate and currently working for Deloitte. But today, what I really wanted to do for this session was have an international student session to hear the international student voice. And we have a fantastic sort of panel of individuals who I'm going to get them to introduce themselves in a moment. I'm then going to ask sort of several questions of the panel before opening up the discussion more widely to those on the call today. So I'm delighted if I could maybe sort of get everyone to introduce themselves. I'm not quite, they see the screen in the same way I do, but maybe if I introduce everyone by their first name and then they can say a bit about themselves before we can pass on to another student. So Sarah, why don't you go first?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Chris. So I'm Sarah. I'm originally from Slovakia, and I'm currently pursuing a master's at Newcastle. And this is actually my second institution in the UK because I did my undergrad in Portsmouth. So I have kind of different views, not only from the south and the north, but also undergrad, postgrad, and some experiences as international student.
Thank you. Gino?
Hi everyone, thank you Chris. My name is Gino Obasaki, I'm from Nigeria and I'm an international student studying my master's at Glasgow Caledonian University. Currently running my dissertation in something around e-vaping right now, which is quite interesting, and I'm glad to be here.
Thank you so much. JP?
Hi, everyone, and thank you, Chris. My name is Jeffy. I'm a final year medical student from Aberdeen, Scotland. And I think prior to starting my medical degree, I did 2 years of A-levels in an English boarding school. So I have a bit of, I guess I kind of experienced both like pre-university and university life in the UK. So I have that perspective. But yeah, it's lovely to meet you all.
Thank you. Aditya?
Hi, everyone. My name is Aditya Mehta. I'm a PhD student at the University of Leeds, studying politics and international studies.
And then Lindsay?
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Lindsay. I'm currently a PhD student at the University of Glasgow. And like Sarah, I also did my master's here in the UK as well, but I stuck with Glasgow and went through both.
Yimbo, you?
Hi, Chris. Hi, everybody. I'm obviously not on the student panel because I'm not a student anymore, but I'm glad to be working with this amazing student ambassador. I also want to flag that one of the student panelists, Reese, is having some technical issue. So we might be having him very soon.
So I think that's everyone, I think, on the panel. I wanted to start the sort of discussion sort of broadly. I think sort of if a panel wish to sort of raise their hands to sort of answer the question, I think that's probably the best way to go shortly. Actually, I think Reese has now joined. Is that right? Reese, are you on there? Hi, Reese. Just want to say hello. Introduce yourself.
Fantastic. I hope everyone can hear me. I've had a bit of a technical difficulty, but I digress. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Reese Chamberlain. I am a third-year undergraduate student studying international relations at the University of Edinburgh, and I came to the UK from the US just about 3 years ago. Thanks for having me.
Thank you very much. So, in terms of sort of discussion, I wanted to ask the panel in terms of expectations versus reality. See, all of you decided to choose the UK. Some of you have been studying elsewhere in different countries before coming to the UK. What were you expecting, and have your expectations been met? And are there any particular sort of aspects of UK student life which you've come to sort of view most fondly, or sort of actually you see as sort of one of the UK's real strengths? Then maybe I could ask, sort of maybe I've got Lindsay, Aditya, and Sarah. Maybe if you wanted to come in.
Sure, I guess I can start with that one. So, like you were saying, I've studied in quite a few different countries, and so coming to the UK, it's probably been the country I've stayed in the longest. And I would say my expectations for coming here, I actually don't know what I was expecting. I knew it was another English-speaking country, so that would be kind of easy for me as, you know, an American coming in. But I think what I enjoyed the most was kind of the independence that came with it. I was able to, like, the classes weren't as structured as I was used to, like during my undergrad in the States. I had a lot more time to kind of develop my own skills, and classes weren't like Monday through Friday. So in that sense, I found that really strong. I was able to kind of really grow in maturity that way. And yeah, coming to the UK, it placed a lot of pressure in like trying to find housing on your own and trying to understand a whole new system. So in that sense, maybe I didn't know what to expect for trying to navigate a new culture and new regulations, new laws. So maybe in that, I don't know if my expectations weren't met, but I just, because I didn't know what to expect, that was kind of a struggle.
So independence of study and potentially looking at sort of barriers around housing. Is anyone else on the panel have any reflections about sort of their initial decision to study in the UK and whether their expectations were met, whether they felt that actually the journey's been a welcome one?
I don't know if Aditya, you just wanted to
go for it. That's fine.
Thank you. So I think I don't really know if I had any specific expectations apart from wanting to live and study in a multicultural society and multicultural community. And as I mentioned, I come from Slovakia, which is the complete opposite. So I was aware of how much I could benefit from being surrounded by kind of the unknown and being able to learn from people from other cultures, other backgrounds, and just people from places that I have perhaps never even visited. And that was definitely met in terms of being able to study in a very diverse society. That's definitely been met. But I feel like, on the other hand, you know, it's not only that I'm studying in a multicultural society, but I sometimes feel like I am being othered as kind of compared to, for example, home students. And I feel like that is probably the other side of living in a multicultural society, where perhaps you are being seen and approached as foreign, which can really hinder the whole experience because, you know, I personally feel at home here, but because I'm being asked whether I'm going back home when I'm done studying, it kind of throws in the question whether I am really welcome, even though I've been here for 5 years. So I don't feel like I am, you know, kind of pushing the signal out that I am planning to leave. But I think it's the two different viewpoints of living in such a diverse community.
So when I started off my application process, part of applying to a PhD program is finding supervisors who are available and willing to take on your project. And I found that at the University of Leeds. So I was more than happy to pursue that because I thought my supervisors were great. I have a wonderful relationship with them, and it's a defining part of my PhD journey. Having said that, I think there are certain structural issues with accommodation and with visa-related issues, particularly the BRP, which a lot of society doesn't understand at large, and that tends to hinder the housing process. So personally, it took me a month to find a place to stay, and it was a very expensive month, which I didn't really sign up for. So I thought that was a significant challenge. But having said that, I think a positive of being in the UK is that it's a multicultural environment, which I really appreciate, and the fact that I can meet a Nigerian, a Libyan, a Chinese, and an Indian on the same day is very fulfilling.
Would anyone else from the panel like to come in on this point, or I can go to a separate sort of question? In that case, several of the contributors have mentioned this point around a multicultural society. I wanted to sort of probe that a bit and ask about sort of the feeling of integration and belonging, and how well people did feel integrated into mainstream student sort of campus life, and what more universities and institutions could do to create that sense of belonging and inclusion. Is the balance right, or is there sort of areas where you feel that actually, in your own experience, more could have been done? Maybe, I don't know, Rhys, can I bring you in on this one to start with? Sorry to chuck you at the deep end.
Absolutely. I think everyone's made really great points about that multicultural aspect of loving studying in the UK, that being one of the biggest perks. Coming from the US, I had my choice of hundreds and hundreds of world-class education institutions, but I knew that I wouldn't get that engagement with so many diverse groups of people as I would if I had chosen to study in the UK. I came to study in the UK in September of 2020, which I'm sure we all know was a very difficult period of time for everyone, and of course the sector. And so when I first came to the UK, I definitely did not feel integrated into my community. And I found there was a bit of a disconnect between what my university promised me they were going to do to ensure that despite the pandemic, there would be some form of cultural engagement in what actually happened in reality. I think that's something that we sort of saw across the sector, but in my personal experience particularly, that was a very difficult period, and it took me quite a long time to feel integrated into the community. And from my personal experience, I really felt like I became, part of the Edinburgh community. I felt part of the city when I got a part-time job. I work a 20-hour-a-week job just so I can, do the fun things I like to do, pay my bills, so on and so forth, like so many other international students out there. And I met a lot of great people through my university, met a lot of great people in my classes, but I really started to feel like I was part of Edinburgh when I started working my job. I started meeting people who are completely disconnected from the university, who didn't go to university, who've been living in Edinburgh all their lives, having that part-time job, which put me in the center of the city, engaging with people from across Edinburgh, across Scotland, across the world on a daily basis, was really sort of the basis of my starting to feel at home in Edinburgh. So I think integration and being part of the local community is not just about what the university can do, not just what students' unions can do, but it's an employability problem. It's an employability question. I found personally having that job was really sort of the catalyst to feeling part of Edinburgh for me personally.
Sarah, you'd like to come in?
Thank you. Yes, I would just like to comment on the integration bit, because I completely agree with Reese that when you start having a part-time job, or just kind of, with me, it's the feeling useful that makes me feel at home somewhere, makes me feel welcome. But I think what I have discovered as an issue in terms of kind of integration are labels we put on students. Because as a European student who's been here before Brexit and has gone through the transition of Brexit happening and now having a pre-settled status, and my status changing basically every couple of months, it's quite difficult to know who I am. And I feel like it's quite difficult from institutions to understand where I belong, which group of students I belong. And that really affects the whole process, because when I arrived the first time and I started studying, I was European in terms of tuition fees. Then when Brexit happened, I gained a pre-settled status, and now on paper I am home student, but everyone knows I'm not quite home. And I feel like I am not really home, nor am I international enough. Is like I am somewhere in between. And I feel like institutions sometimes overlook that, they overlook the fact that, okay, I do not really have the same rights as home students in terms of, let's say, financial support, but also I cannot get financial support as international because I am not that anymore. And I think I am somewhere in between, and people don't really understand who I am. So I feel like maybe challenging the labels that we put on students, because now I don't need visa, but at the same time, other European students might need visa who have come after Brexit. So I think I would really like institutions to sort of start having a discussion around labels, home, international, European. What does it actually mean? And are they useful, or are we actually making the whole integration process just a bit more difficult?
Thank you. Really good point. And we'll bring in Aditya, then Lindsay, and Gina and Jifei, do come in if there's points you'd like to raise. I see you nodding your head as well, so I'm keen to get a sense of your thoughts as well. Aditya.
I can offer the perspective of life in a PhD program, because PhD typically lacks the structure of an undergraduate or master's program. And that can be, for a lot of students, that can be quite lonely and isolating, because PhD is an individual process as it is. And I know that this affects international students as much as it affects local students, particularly those who are commuting, because we don't really have classes that we take on a regular basis. And somewhere I feel like that's also a communication issue between the university and prospective students so that students know exactly what they're going to get into with respect to the structure of the program. And to me personally, because I've lived in a number of countries and I'm a fairly social person, so it doesn't affect me as much, but I know for a fact that there are a lot of students who find it to be quite an isolating experience.
Thank you. Lindsay, do you want to come in?
Right, and I guess I'll kind of echo Aditya on the whole PhD situation, because coming from a master's, we had our cohorts and we had classes, even if it was halfway through COVID and then it kind of separated, but you had that base. And then obviously going into the PhD, it's an isolated process. But I kind of wanted to bring in the aspect of within the institution itself and within these cohorts. So the research I'm doing is actually on international student employability. And in some of these instances, like some of these interviews I've had with other students, kind of comes up that there's such a large recruitment of some nationalities of students that it sometimes feels like they actually don't get the opportunity to explore the local community and feel integrated that way. They feel like they've just come, like brought home with them. So there might be something to be said about balancing the structures that are in place in some certain classrooms or in some courses or cohorts, just to bring that multiculturalism and international aspect. So it's not, students are coming here to gain that kind of global outlook. But if there's such a heavy recruitment and, you have maybe 2 local students and maybe a handful of other nationalities and then just one major nationality, it kind of takes away from that feeling of integrating into, for one, the institution, and then your local community or within the community that is the international student body. And I know I felt that, and you tend to can navigate or orientate yourself towards your own nationality because it feels familiar, but there is that sense of lacking that you come to an international, like a foreign country, and you want to experience something a bit more than that.
Gino, and then JP.
I think Gino raised his hand first, so Gino, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Lindsay, on behalf of Nigerians and Indians. I know that's an indirect jibe to us. we're everywhere. But talking about integration, I mentioned this yesterday in the conference in London, and I mentioned that beyond recruiting, the university has to do more to integrate students compared to the services they have available and the ratio of students that use those services. It's very, very low when you do the math and do the percentage, right? And it also comes to a lot of social events or cultural events that are held beyond academics, right? So recruiting the students in my school, for instance, I don't think the student union is quite separate from the university, right? It means that the student union has to look for your own funding and some other things like that. But apart from the World Com Week, what other social event brings students together? What other thing brings students together to integrate? Nothing. So most time on campus, you see people tilting towards the nationals, where you have the Indian society, you have the Nigerian society. Those 2 societies I know are always pulling crowd, right? And clearly it's just continuing from home, basically, when you're meant to mingle and try to mix around other people. Yeah.
So I think I bring the perspective, a bit of a unique perspective, because I think medicine is one of those degrees where it's just so different from other sort of undergrad degrees and courses. In fact, the medical school is so isolated from the rest of the campus generally. And so personally, now I'm in my 5th year of medicine and I guess my 7th year of being in the UK. And I think studying medicine in Aberdeen, definitely when I first started, it was quite difficult to integrate. And, this is, taking into consideration that I had already been in the UK for 2 years. English is my first language. Language wasn't really a barrier. I wouldn't even say culture was necessarily a barrier, but it was difficult because I think the nature of my course was there weren't many international students in medicine, let alone Malaysians like myself. So I really had to go out of my way to sort of find a group to sort of join and find people with common interests to make friends with. But that's by and by it. I do think that there were some challenges, like I think the drinking culture definitely. I think that it's such a strong culture in the UK, such that most social events, especially in sort of the freshest year, first year university, it does feel a bit of a, what you call it, like something that may potentially exclude certain groups of people who don't drink. I mean, I do, partake in that, but I did feel like there was a bit of pressure, a sort of social pressure to join these sort of parties and this sort of culture in order to make friends, which I think can hinder integration. So, I do think that universities could try to encourage or to, provide more sort of space and opportunities for sort of social events that don't involve drinking. But I think that's something that students can organize organically anyway. And I'm not sure if there's anything else I can add to what everyone said. I do think that I think I echo what Reese and I think Lindsay was saying about, trying to encourage international students to mingle with the local community. It can happen quite organically by finding part-time jobs and sort of working with the community. But I think my degree it's quite established in my degree because I am working in a hospital. I am sort of serving the community as part of my degree. So perhaps this is something that could be considered for other sort of courses as well. Could there be an element of the course where the students are encouraged to take up, internships or, sort of working directly or for the community? Because that I do agree, it does allow students to sort of meet people very organically and sort of form those relationships quite naturally.
Thank you very much. I'm struck by how everyone says there's some of these wraparound support issues, obviously are quite literally wraparound, from mentioning around taking a job or working to try to find the sort of social setting by which you can sort of meet with other students. In terms of and I don't want to focus just on all the challenges and try to be negative here. I do want to sort of explore those sort of opportunities and the positives. But were there any sort of specific things where you look back and say, this is what the university could have done differently that would have actually enhanced your experience on campus? And I think we'll come on to the employment bit separately, but just really keen to get a sense of, and also whether those decision-making processes you felt included in them, or whether that was the student union, or whether that was sort of actually the pastoral sort of support that was being sort of provided by the university itself. What specific things you feel could have been done differently, or any particular challenges that you can identify as being, well, this was something I would have done differently? To come in, or pick Adita.
I think to begin with, structure is quite key. And in previous degrees that I did at Emory University and Duke University in the US, I found structure to be quite helpful, because the more frequently that a group of students can meet one another in a setting, it helps build those social bonds. And again, I say this also on behalf of my British friends who commute from nearby towns, and this affects them as much because they feel like they don't have as many friends as they probably would have had they been in more structured environments. So I think that helps socially as well, but it also helps academically. And we're on the same sort of level playing field then, because at least in a PhD program, everyone's coming from different backgrounds with varying degrees of work experience, and to have as much commonality as possible would be really helpful.
Anyone else got any sort of thoughts where you could look back and think, I wish that had been in place? I mean, I know we've spoken a bit about some of the other additional things, but for universities particularly, I will keen in the commission to make recommendations on how universities might be able to look at their provision for international students and make it more student-centered. Gino?
Just to mention something that happened on campus some weeks ago. We lost an international student in Nigeria, and it took about 4 days to get an official message from the school to the Nigerian society, which was quite disturbing from some point of view. 4 days is a lot, inclusive of weekends, making it 6 days, right? So it was really, really appalling. And I think when we did a march to the student union, the question was, or the result was, the school had never faced something like this before. It's the first time. So going back to structure, to what Aditya mentioned, there has to be structure in place in case things like this happen, so that those the people from that community will not feel isolated. In other words, if this happens to me, what would the university do, right? And in as much as we understand in the UK, it's quite different from where we are from in Africa or in Nigeria, right? There are process and procedures, right? A little message to the community will be very, very helpful, right? Good intentions that are not expressed well is left to misconceptions. So if you have good intentions at university for your community, if they're grieving and they don't know about it, it could be misconcepted to other things, right? And unfortunately, or fortunately, because this is not what we're used to in Nigeria, things like this lead to, within matter of moments, if you don't hear from the school, lead to protest. But because of the society we're in, we had to wait for 4 working days, because the event happened on a Thursday, there was a Friday, there was a Saturday, Sunday, and the school sent out a message on Wednesday, which was very, very bad. So if schools could have structures and things in place in case of eventualities, which would be very, very nice, because anything can happen to anybody anytime.
Thank you. Reese, you'd like to come in?
I think from a university policy perspective, integration is a difficult one, particularly at Edinburgh University personally. As I mentioned before, I came to the UK in September of 2020, and my cohort was advised by the university to still come to campus in September of that first year, despite sort of an understanding that courses couldn't be taught as normal. And so I think for my cohort and for some cohorts after me, there's, amongst international students particularly, there's this sort of aura of distrust of university executives. Do they really have our best interests at heart? I know that was something that international students talked about a lot in my cohort when we were all sort of locked down in halls, obviously not going to class. We're all sort of sitting in our own little blocks, taking Zoom calls of classes all day. A lot of students started saying, why are we here? The universities told international students, come to campus, come here. Did they tell us to come to campus because they had our best interests at heart, or was it for some other motivation? So I know here at Edinburgh University, when it comes to, responding to university attempts to get students to meet up and international student policies in particular, there's sort of an air of distrust. University students sort of don't believe that executives really have those best interests at heart, particularly after the pandemic was handled for international students. So what I found at Edinburgh University is students just go to the Students' Union. The Students' Union, again, is run by students for students, and students here in Edinburgh, particularly international students, find that a more comfortable atmosphere to meet. And the Students' Union here at Edinburgh in particular does a lot of really good work to put on a lot of events to get people to meet, and has great facilities with which to do that. But from an international student perspective, and from a university policy perspective, I think here in Edinburgh, a lot of students said they made us come. Perhaps they shouldn't have made us come in that first year. Do they really have our interests at heart? And I know a lot of people, name drop the vice chancellor here quite a lot, and in pretty negative ways, because they just don't trust the university is truly caring for international students for the right reasons. So I think that may be a hurdle that other students in other universities face at the same time. So I think some sort of rehabilitation of that relationship is needed to, encourage students to meet and go along with university policies and attempts to get students to meet and be part of that community.
Thank you. Would anyone from the panel like to add to that in terms of any specifics? But if not, I can open up questions now to sort of wider commissioners from the IHEC and members of the audience if they'd like to raise their hand. We've got a number of vice chancellors, Nick Beach, James Purnell, I can see, who very kindly sort of are commissioners, and I'm keen to make sure that everyone can ask questions. Nick Mitchell has asked a question in the chat box. So Nick, do you want to sort of come in if you're not too afraid to turn your mic on, or sort of then to ask your question? Thank you.
Hello, can you hear us?
Yep.
Okay. Yeah, I'm quite interested to know, as it's been an issue bubbling away amongst the politicians, how important the panel feels that the 2-year postgraduate study, the graduate route is for UK students. In the States, it's 1 year. In Australia, I think it's 4 years. There's been suggestions it might be cut to 3 to 6 months. But how important is it as a draw to come to the UK to study?
Adisa, and then a few hands. Adisa, Gino, then Lindsay.
Thank you for your question. Just a couple of days ago, I was in conversation with a number of students from India who had taken education loans and chose to come to the UK primarily because they'd have the opportunity to study for 2 years and potentially repay that loan. So it's a significant draw, and I also know that the ongoing political rhetoric has caused a fair degree of discomfort among international students, and there is uncertainty because a lot of them are traveling out of the country for the first time, and there are challenges in adaptability anyway. So it's just an additional it's an additional sort of challenge that's at the back of their minds now.
Gino.
Yeah, so prior to 2021, when I got the scholarship to school in Glasgow Caledonian University, full tuition, I've been applying to study here since 2013, and I only knew that the only way I could attend, unlike Indians and a couple of European countries, you have access to loans and student financing, but in Nigeria, we don't have that much, right? So I could only come here through a fully funded scholarship. But at different intervals, I got that past scholarships from undergraduates. But at points where I bring it up, my eldest brother, who had the financial backing to cover the rest, the question was, then when you're done, you just come back home. What next, right? So luckily I got a scholarship this time, and there was more possibility and viability of saying, aside your program, you have 2 years to stay, you have 2 years to work, and from there you could decide if you want to stay in Europe or go to any American country if you get a job, peradventure. And I could tell you that that's one of the biggest drag for most Nigerians. Right. If you look at the statistics after 2019, is it 2019 when the PWS was made available, you would see the influx of Nigerians has skyrocketed drastically from that, and it's a major reason why they are coming here. Although I have issues with getting employability and issues like that, but I'm not going to mention it now.
Well, we can come on to the employability in a moment. Happy to discuss that. But Lindsay.
So I guess just going off on that, on the graduate scheme being a draw, I think that it is, but I think it's also kind of misunderstood. And it's this promise that you can stay, but then maybe not realizing the expense of it. So we've been talking about how much it is to actually, either pay for your student fees and the cost of living. And then when you realize the cost of the graduate scheme visa is it's an added expense that you'll still have to pay back, and it's not even a guarantee that you'll get a job. So there's just this kind of balance of, is it worth it to go on this graduate scheme after you graduate, or do you just try and find sponsorship and go that route? So it's kind of, you know, which is the better option for international students in terms of what will actually benefit them in terms of applying their employability and kind of really establishing themselves either in the UK or if they choose to go back home or elsewhere. And I think that's been a real concern so far in the research I've been doing, and for myself, I'm struggling with that too, of what will be the next route of option, I guess.
James Burnell, Vice Chancellor of the University of Arts London. James, do you want to come in? Thanks very much.
Yes, it's a fascinating discussion. Thanks for having me along. I understand why people have some of those things to say about vice chancellors, but I just want to reassure everybody we do very much care about our international students. And I'm sure the only reason that Edinburgh wanted people on site was to try and make sure that people were part of the best experience they could be part of. And we all, I think, did our best to cope with the uncertainties of COVID. So I'm sure it wasn't badly motivated, even though I totally recognise that for many students, the period around COVID was extremely challenging. I'd be interested in the question around access. Obviously with home students, we have a lower fee, and we have quite a big policy framework to ensure that people from all backgrounds can come to our universities. International fees are obviously set higher. I'd be interested in people's experience of affordability, and which we touched on a bit, but I suppose in particular what more universities can do to start to match our approach to equality for international students to the one we have for home students.
JP, you have your hand up first, and Adita, and any of the other panel members, please, thank you very much. Sarah, after that.
I think that it's sort of an unspoken sort of truth that medicine is quite possibly one of the most expensive degrees out there. It's extortionate for international students. And since I've started medicine in 2018 until now, there's been an incremental increase in the tuition fees by, I think, around 5 to 10% every year. So I think when I started out, I was paying, well, rather my parents were paying £39,000 a year. And I think right now it's gone up to £46,000 a year for international students. And, I think sometimes after so many years of being in the UK, I and probably my international student friends, we get a bit desensitized by exactly how extortionate and how it's an unfathomable amount of money for lots of people, but it's just expected of the international students. And so I think that certainly, I feel like access is unquestionably an issue for international students to study medicine. And I think probably some of, or a lot of you have heard in the news, the situation with the hemorrhage of sort of junior doctors. We're losing a lot of doctors to other countries. Even the British doctors are sort of contemplating moving overseas because of the junior doctor pay and all that. And I think thinking into the future, I do see less and less international students wanting to come to the UK to study medicine, because the fees is one thing, but it's also sort of the prospect of better futures in other countries as well. So yeah, I think from that perspective, I think universities could do a lot more, medical schools could do a lot more to sort of put in some financial support, loans, bursaries for international students to incentivize them, support them, throughout their medical school. I know that you can't change the fact that it's going to be expensive for them to study medicine, but I do think that more could be done to support them whilst they're studying medicine, for any sort of hardship bursaries in case of any extenuating circumstances coming up. And I do think it's an investment that will pay a lot of dividends in terms of incentivizing them to stay put after they graduate as a doctor in the UK. Because quite honestly, whilst I am staying put in the UK post-graduation for at least 2 years, I do think that increasingly less reason for me to stay put beyond that. If with a British medical degree, if I could work in Australia, if I could work in another country where they're prepared to, sort of pay me a salary that's commensurate with the amount of work and my qualification. I mean, in that sense, it is a sort of mindset that would be shared by many international doctors as well. And I think that a lot of forward thinking needs to be done to stop this from happening.
Thank you. Aditya, then Sarah.
Once again, I'd like to share the PhD perspective, because obviously we're all acutely aware that there's a significant gap between what domestic students pay and what international students pay. But I think where it really gets awkward is that during a PhD induction, we're told that the major sort of engagement in your program is reflected through the number of supervision meetings that you have. And in literally the first induction meeting, we're told that if international students don't register 10 supervision meetings in an academic year, the Home Office comes knocking. And that's quite stirring, because first off, it wasn't communicated ahead of time, like during the application process. And secondly, I'm not sure that that's an accurate measure to reflect a student's engagement in the program. So with an international student who's paying significantly more to study, if you don't do 10 supervision meetings, then you've got problems with the Home Office. But if that same thing doesn't happen with a local student, then there's no real consequence there. And compounded with the fact that an international student starting off has to find housing, set up a bank account, register with the NHS. So it's like two students start the same program, but they're not on an equal footing. And again, it can be quite sort of disconcerting for an international student who's starting out a PhD program.
Thank you. Sarah, can I bring you in? And then another question from Nick Beach. Sarah.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's even difficult. I was trying to collect my thoughts to even know where to start, because I feel like it's really, really difficult in terms of finances for international students. And personally, even though I am kind of a hybrid of being not only international student, but I come from a background where my family can support me financially. And that was the case. Well, that has been the case ever since I started studying. And, I feel quite disadvantaged in a way that I constantly have to make sure that I'm working. And sometimes it's more than just one job at a time, so that I can cover my rent, and I can cover my living expenses, and just everything that is involved with the student's life. And even though I have a postgraduate loan that covers my tuition, I still find it quite challenging, because there isn't much of that loan left for me to live on. And when I was doing my undergraduate degree, obviously I was European and I didn't really have access to any financial support. And when I started inquiring about financial support in terms of now having the home student fee status, I was declined any kind of calls for support, because that was justified by the fact that I didn't have access to maintenance loan during my undergraduate degree. So I can't really access that as a home student. Plus, I would say it's quite difficult even now, because when I approached the financial support at my current university, just inquiring about what would be possible, I was told that postgraduate degrees aren't really supported in this way, that there isn't much financial support available to postgraduate students anyway. So it's been quite challenging for me to balance everything. And as I mentioned, rent, for example, it's really difficult that I have to think, so long ahead, because I don't have a UK guarantor. And, when I'm moving or when I'm paying my rent, I have to either pay, at least 6 months in advance, if not the whole contracted period, or I have to pay for online guarantor services, which are quite expensive as well. And I feel like it's quite difficult now because I feel a bit discriminated against, because if you think about it, home students, the majority probably can provide a UK guarantor to make sure that they can pay their rent. But I highly doubt that international students are all in a position where they can provide that without losing, again, more money. And I would say a positive thing, so that it's not all just negative and about struggles, is that at my current institution in Newcastle, I feel like we have quite a good support in terms of internships that we can do during our studies. So I think that is very, very helpful in terms of being able to make money on site and budget. But I feel like that is not the case at every institution, which I can tell from my previous experience of being in Portsmouth, which I don't know how it is now, but back at Portsmouth, I had a part-time job outside of university, which was also quite demanding. So it had an impact on my studies and on how much time I could actually spend, focusing on my degree, which is the main reason I came. So I think there are many things I could talk about, but yeah, it's been quite difficult.
Gino, did you want to come in on that point?
Yeah.
And then to Nick. Yeah.
Yeah. Just to mention the issue about tuition and to point out some things that Sarah was mentioning. I'd want to start with tuition. Yeah. Fortunately for me, I'm on scholarship, so I don't pay tuition. So I don't know how it feels. But at the same time, I have noticed that, like I said, I've been applying to study in the UK since 2013, and I've been seeing that increment, like she said, like 5 to 10% increase. And the question is, we don't know what for, right? What's the increment for, right? And if it's to guide against inflation, what's the justification? Most times these things are not stated out. But I noticed that because of the influx of particularly Nigerians, and I'm saying so because I hold a departmental role and an ambassador in school too. So I have a lot of Nigerians come to me when they want to apply, or they have cousins or friends who want to apply, and I have to point them to the right direction, right? There was an increase from, I think, 13,000 to 16,000 in tuition just because they noticed the increase of Nigerians applying to the uni, right? So international students' fees have just increased. One, the deposit you're meant to pay have increased also by £1,000. So those things are really like pushing students back from applying back home. But because of social mobility, the need to get a better life, they also want to do that. And coming into the issue where Sarah mentioned about housing, I had someone who was in Nigeria who was duped of £4,000 in January, because she was requested to pay 6 months house rent because she had because of the requirements. Yeah, she had no guarantor, UK guarantor, no work, no employment history in the UK. How can an international student, possibly from Nigeria, have a credit score in the UK? Things like that are things we need to question. And I would like to relate this to something I'm writing currently. It's called the social solution lifespan, where I said every social solution has a lifespan, and I think the lifespan for the policies that are put in place to get these requirements for housing needs to be checked, because the components surrounding that social problem at that time has changed, right? If the UK has in some way done the PWS visa, which also kind of increases the number of international students they have, it means that some policies has to be toned down for live and integration to be smooth for the international students. But imagine someone coming into school and still having issues with housing for 2 months, 3 months, spending more than the UKVI financial requirements for personal expenses would obviously affect your mental health and obviously take it downtown on your assessment also.
Thank you very much. Nick Beach. a question also from Diana Beach, no relation, but apart from that, they're both sort of working on higher education in London, and I'm sure they'll explain. And then maybe a last word for Anna Petova as well. So Nick.
Thanks, Chris, and thanks for those really compelling stories and examples that you've given. If I was to read some of the press, it's almost as if international students are like numbers, really. It's about finances, it's just the number that we need. We've heard quite a lot about identity, relationships, your experiences, and building on what James was saying, I think lots of universities would want to see you as people who they invite and want to be part of their community. So my question is a bit blunt, to be honest, is do you feel like a person welcome as part of the community? Do you feel like a number, or do you feel like something else?
Gino's got his hand up first, and then other members of the panel do sort of feel free to come in.
Yeah, I think, like I said, just because of the position I have, I interact with a lot of Nigerian students who come in, and I can tell you 50% of most Nigerians I've interacted with in Glasgow Caledonian University who came with their spouse want to go back home, right? If they had the opportunity, and if they've not invested so much finances into this trip, and if the country back home was okay, they would have gone back home, right? Because I mentioned something at the NE conference yesterday, is simply going beyond just recruiting students, right? And making us feel like we're just a number. That was what the issue with the students who passed on was like, right? Is you're making us feel like we're just a number. And even if we're part of the numbers, we know what financial role we are playing to the sustainability of that university, right? So we cannot be looked down on anymore, right? We want things to be done. I have a very, very extreme view, right, on housing, for instance. I, for one, really feel like universities should be responsible to 60% extent of trying to find accommodation for a student. This is why I say so, right? In terms of sponsorship, you have the CAS letter, which seemingly works like a sponsorship letter for a doctor that's coming from Nigeria, right? So after they finish their PLAB, they get a job in the UK. They get a job in the UK from an hospital, and they get like a sponsorship letter to them for UKVI reasons, right? And you see that hospital trying to get the doctor, or give the doctor like options in terms of housing, right? Oh, we have this accommodation available. Would you want to take this? Trying to look for accommodation. But you see, these things is the moment you've paid for your tuition, the moment you are down here, the university can just tell you, oh, we're sorry, there's nothing we can do, and leave the mail there. It goes beyond that, because like I said, those external factors affect the student's mental health, and which in turn will affect his commitment or to classes and assessments also, right? So it's more like a number, because I can't imagine sending an email to the accommodation team this year, earlier in the year, when I had a lot of Nigerians having issues with accommodations and a lot of international students also. And like, oh, there's nothing we can do. Oh, do you want them to sleep on the floor? Right. So I believe if there's some of like concern, that's earnest concern to say, oh, could we even have a list of people could you compile a list of people who are stranded? Is there something we can do? Right. Personally, I've tried to check up on my own view, try to check up if there are abandoned buildings in Glasgow community to see if I could raise funds to revamp buildings where international students who are stranded can stay for a while. But there's none. And the university is just saying, sorry, you can't do anything. But that's why we feel like a number.
Thank you. We are coming close to the end of the session, so I'm quite keen to get as many viewpoints in as possible. Could I ask everyone to sort of get their views across in a sort of curtailed way, just so we can make sure everyone gets their say. JF, Sarah, Lindsay, and then Aditya. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I actually think that I'm very blessed in the sense that in the 7 years I've been in the UK, I've actually felt very, very well supported. And I think that it's partly because of the nature of my course. I think medicine in general, there has been a lot of emphasis on sort of pastoral care for the students. But also I think it's a Scottish thing. I think that generally Scottish universities are more, I think Scots in general, they're very friendly people. I felt that sort of I could really talk to the year secretaries, the members of the course team and stuff like that. There's a lot of emphasis. I think that I can't speak for universities in England, but I do think that generally speaking, my experience having studied medicine in a Scottish university has been excellent in that sense. And I think it would be always, I always find it very interesting speaking to my counterparts down in England who are doing medicine there and listening to their experiences there, because I think there's much to be learned from the Scottish medical schools.
Thank you. I think that's a very interesting question, and I'm happy that someone is finally talking about our identities and how we feel. And I think at the beginning of my studies, I felt quite anonymous because I was just part of this really large group and no one really cared beyond my status, which again goes back to the labels that I mentioned before. But I think when it started changing was actually when I applied to be an ambassador for UKISA, because I feel like through that, I really gained the feeling of, being useful and having a platform where I can voice my opinions. So that has definitely helped. And I'm very grateful for that. However, what I would like to see is, people kind of using the platform to really drive change, because now it feels, and again, I have to go back to the labels, because now it feels like, even when I attend conferences and I talk about the international student experience, it feels like because I might be in the minority of, European students having a pre-settled status, I feel like people don't really want to talk about it. And that just makes me feel like we are very market oriented, like no one really talks about, okay, how do we keep attracting European students beyond the fact that we want to generate profit in a way, and I think that's quite sad that I feel like we don't really open these discussions because we see the potential of like bigger market in perhaps different countries, different parts of the world. And I think that is actually really sad. So I think in terms of that, even though now I finally have a platform where I can talk about this, I just wish we could talk about it a bit more and go beyond, for example, just visa and BRP issues that are very important still. But, we are also a group. So I don't want to feel like I am screaming underwater just because I'm European with a pre-settled status. No, so, yeah.
Thank you. I'm going to go to Lindsay, Aditya, and then probably Yimbo. I'm conscious of time. I'm apologies to Diana and Anna. I think we're probably not going to get to your questions, but if you wanted to write yours in the box, we'll definitely make sure it's circulated. Diana's asked a question around sort of working hours and whether the potential increase from 20 to 30 would make any difference. But I'm keen to make sure that all student panels get their say in before we have to finish. So Aditya and then Yimbo.
Okay.
Sorry, Lindsay, I think you were first. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry. So the hand went down. I think I missed up.
Oh, no, I was just preparing. I guess I'll just touch on this quickly because I feel like there are a lot of supports that go around in terms of like emails that get sent out. And we're always getting kind of bombarded by all this media and that kind of support because that's kind of the easiest way to reach a large mass of people. But I feel like we sometimes get lost in the terms of like, we're approached as a homogenous group as opposed to like heterogeneous. And so when we approach a lot of these services, when we approach them, they're just like, we treat every student the same. But as an international, we might need further support than what can be offered to a home student in terms of like understanding cultural nuances and why certain things, like why I should approach, like how I would approach maybe mental health services, that might be viewed differently in one culture to another. But if you just say, oh, just go do it like how a UK student would do it, it kind of gets lost and the meaning is lost. So I feel like in terms of being supported that way really needs to be emphasized, because we're not all the same and we all come from different backgrounds that aren't exactly as comfortable with the UK and navigating that aspect, as well as navigating a whole new university system as well.
Thank you very much. That's still some of those lines, if that's all right, for potential report. Sort of really like some of this heterogeneous, not homogeneous. Aditya, can I bring you in, and then maybe Yimbo to sort of finish up? And if anyone's not feel they've had their say, I'm conscious to try to get you in before we close. So Aditya.
Well, personally, I'd like to think of myself as a global citizen, so I try to be as comfortable as I am wherever I go. But having said that, I'm quite aware of the fact that international students are to a very large degree considered to be a number, so to speak. And I've been in high-level meetings in university where the authorities have no qualms about implying that they make no money on local students, and therefore international students subsidize that cost. And I think that makes it abundantly clear. And additionally, I think if you look at like problem resolution, whether it's with basic services like housing, banking, registering with a medical facility, it's you bring up a problem with the university, and as Gino said, they say that I'm sorry, we can't help you here. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you. Yimbo, final word to yourself. So I'm conscious of the time and wanting to make sure we can finish. So over to you.
Thanks, Chris. I just want to come in quickly to reflect on, I know we talked a lot about the challenges and lots of hardships that our student ambassadors are facing, and they talked about their collective shared experience. That sounds quite negative, but I do see it as a really kind of like positive step forward, that the fact that the IHEC is including the student voice, the fact that we are having this conversation today, with you, Chris, with other commissioners, with so many senior sector leaders, that's never really happened in the past. I think it's definitely a very good step forward to including this very vivid, fresh student experience to helping us shape the policy and inform practice that we can support the wider students. I definitely see that as a very positive light. So I just want to quickly, say thanks to you, Chris, and David, and all the other student commissioners that including the students' voice in this space. I think it's a really positive step forward.
Well, that's incredibly kind. And can I reciprocate in saying thank you so much to the UKISA student ambassadors for taking part in this session. I think we've also got another potential panel discussion that the IHEC is organising at the Pi Live in London on the 29th of March. So I hope this won't be the only opportunity by any means that we'll have to include the international student voice front and centre of the Commission. I'm really keen, and I've learned so much today, and it's a completely different opportunity than what would have happened if it was just policymakers in a room, if I'm honest with you. And as a universities minister, I always found it the best part about the job was actually getting around the country and listening to the students themselves. You had a completely different perspective sometimes to speaking to the Vice-Chancellors. Apologies for the Vice-Chancellors on the call. So this has been a really rewarding session. I'd like to thank everyone for your time today, setting out challenges, but also opportunities. And what I hope is that by participating in this session is that you will be able to influence policy, and that then potentially, this might change the experience of future students coming to the UK. So hopefully you found it really valuable as well. And thank you again, all of you, for your time. And thanks to all our commissioners, and thank you for participating, everyone, in this latest session. And we'll be sending you more details about the next meetings of the Commission as and when they happen very shortly. So thank you so much, and look forward to working with everyone in the future, and have a good rest of the day.